Today, we're getting started with stage 1 brainstorming, and our topic is the idea. But first, I have to show you my really cool shirt. It says Trust the Owl. Okay. And it was made for me by Hannah McManus. She gave it to me at a writer's conference. She painted two, one for her and one for me. And it was inspired by my Safelands trilogy right here. Bing, bing, bing. Particularly book 2. One of the characters becomes a superhero. He calls himself the Owl. Okay, let's move on to the idea. What is a premise? A premise is the gist of your story. It's the idea. It's how you explain what your story is about. Okay, but how do you come up with a story idea, especially a good one? Ideas are everywhere. I was once speaking at a middle school assembly, and I was talking on the topic of how to come up with a good idea. And I looked around that crowd of teenagers, and I saw a girl sitting in the front row wearing shoes kind of like these. Little cheetah print shoes. Aren't they cute? And I pointed at her and I said, what you guys don't know about this girl right here is that she is a shapeshifter. She shapeshifts into a cheetah. Just look around. There's ideas everywhere. I have this little Venus flytrap on my kitchen counter. But just looking at this plant gives me ideas. Like, what if there was a world where there were giant Venus flytrap-like plants that kind of came out of the ground and ate people as they walked by? Or what if a person got eaten by a giant Venus flytrap-like plant and it transported them to another world? Maybe each little mouth, or whatever you call them, takes you to a different world. And the little stems are like slides. Woo! Asking a what if question. A what if question is how I came up with the story Replication. I was driving in a car in upstate New York on our way to pick apples at an orchard, going past field after field, orchard, farm, all this kind of stuff. And I was looking out the window thinking, what if there was a farm that grew people? Clones. They could call it Jason Farms. Here are some examples of what if questions. What if a boy found out he was a demigod? What if Peter Pan grew up? What if a boy was raised by wild animals? Then there's the opposites attract way of coming up with ideas. Combine two separate somethings that don't really belong. Stephen King talks about it in his book On Writing. He talks about how he combined murder and mayhem and prom to come up with the story Carrie. So you could combine concepts or characters or famous stories like the TARDIS in Narnia. Obviously, you can't write a story about the Narnia characters or the Doctor Who characters because they are under copyright. But you could use the concepts to come up with your own story. Here are a few more examples. Military training and children. A Regency era and fantasy. A lawyer and honesty. Love and vampires. Another thing you can do is build off your own story world. Maybe you've already written a series. Maybe you want to do a spin-off. The Kinsman Chronicles is a spin-off of My Blood of Kings. It's an ancient prequel about 500 years in the past. The Thirst novels were the apocalyptic story that started my future dystopia of the Safelands. You can use what others have used. Because the thing is, people have been telling stories for a really long time. It seems like there's no new idea under the sun. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. There might not be any new ideas, but there are new ways that you can write them. So if there's a story that you love or some concept that you love, spend some time trying to find a way to twist it on its head and make it your own. Retellings, there's a lot of them, but there's a reason there's a lot of them. People like retellings. You can retell all kinds of things as long as the story is in the public domain. You can retell fairy tales, classics like Dickens and Jane Austen, and mythology stories of Norse gods, of Greek gods, of all kinds of stories from ancient times. Retellings can be done one of two ways. You can either tell us the same story with new characters, or you can take one of the characters and tell a spin-off story. You can get ideas from other books. Now, you can write fan fiction all you want for fun, but you can't publish it if the story is not in the public domain. If somebody owns the rights to that story, you can't write that. That's against the law. But what you can do is be inspired by it and come up with your own story. Brandon Sanderson talks about how he came up with the idea for this book, The Arithmetist, when he was reading Harry Potter, because he was intrigued by the squib characters, characters who grew up in magical families but couldn't do the magic. That idea alone sent him on a trail until he came up with this book. I hope that all of that will help you come up with a variety of really good ideas.